Hello, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to get structured JSON from GPT, then how to parse it in Bubble so that you can save it into your database in a nice structure, and you can basically use it to make all kinds of really cool apps. So the example app we are going to look at today is this course platform. So if you look at this course, looks just like a normal course that you might sign up for. Entrepreneurship Essentials. It's got a description, it's got a nice header image, and then it seems to have 6 lessons. I can click on the first lesson here, Discovering Your Big Idea. I scroll down, it's got some good content there, nice and easy to read. And then I go to the next one, Crafting a Business Model, and so on. And they all look like pretty good, well-structured lessons. But the interesting thing is that all of this content came from GPT. And not only that, but if I click here, I can see that all of these different courses are available and all of their content came from GPT. So, for example, we can have a look at this one, The Art of Thai Cuisine. And yes, although they've got some weird looking people in this header image here, all of this was generated from a very simple prompt. And look at these images, these all look stunning. And then so it starts with Introduction to Thai Ingredients, all the core ingredients that you need to know about, how to make the perfect pad Thai, proper recipe, Thai curry essentials. So essentially a decent quality course, given that I didn't actually put much effort at all into the prompts for any of this stuff. And the really cool thing is that I can just click create course and I can ask it to generate a course on any topic. Let's choose how to fly a plane. Now this part takes 2 to 3 minutes, so I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back in a second. And here we are about 3 minutes later, and we have a course called The Basics of Flight, Learning to Pilot a Plane. It's got a description here. Then we have 6 lessons, which is the number of lessons I've asked it to create every time. Introduction to Aviation, Pre-Flight Procedures, Basic Maneuvering and Controls, and so on. You get the idea. But this course was just created in the last 3 minutes, and all I had to do was feed it a prompt. So let's look at how all this is done. So the most important page here is the generator course page, because that's the one that triggers the whole process of creating a course. So let's have a look at how that's done. So first, let's look at the database. So I kept the database very, very simple. It has 2 things apart from users. It has courses and it has lessons. So the course is made up of a title of the course. It also has the description of the course. It has the header image, which you see on all the course pages. And then I have 2 other fields. One is the prompt, which is what I type in to generate the course. I don't need to save that, but I thought I would just save it just because it's interesting to know. And also the raw JSON. And this is the response that we're going to get from GPT. So I save it onto the course itself. Then apart from courses, I also have lessons. So lessons are associated with a course. Lessons have a title, which is text. They have a description, which is text. They also have content, which is text. And they have an image, which is an image. And they have an image prompt, which is also text. And they also have an order, which is just a number. And this helps me to arrange them in order and then move them around if I wanted to change the order. So now you've seen the pretty simple data structure. Let's look at the actual workflows on this page. So when you click generate, the first thing it does is it creates a new course and it saves the prompt that you typed into the multi-line input, this one. It saves it onto the course in the field called prompt. And then it schedules a backend workflow or an API workflow called create course, which is what we're going to look at next. It schedules it for the current date and time, and the data it sends through to that backend workflow is the course that we created in step 1. And then finally it goes to the page course and it sends the course that we created in step 1. Now almost everything in this app functions in backend or API workflows. So if you've never used backend workflows in Bubble, they are a really, really good way of taking all of the heavy lifting away from the front end of your app and running it asynchronously on the server. So the good thing about doing things in backend workflows instead of just doing a very long workflow on the front end is that once the user clicks that generate button, they are free to navigate away from the site. They can close the page completely, they can close the browser completely, and everything that has been triggered by that generate button will continue happening. So as I said earlier, creating the courses takes about 3 minutes because it has to generate all the content and all the images. And obviously a lot of users are not going to wait around on your site for 3 minutes. So by doing everything in the back end, you ensure that everything gets done regardless of what page they're on or what actions they're taking in the browser once they've clicked that generate button. So the backend workflows tab you can find here at the bottom of your pages list. If you can't see it, then you need to go into your settings, go to API, and tick this box, enable workflow API and backend workflows. And once you've done that, you will see your backend workflows page here, except it doesn't really have a page, it's just workflows. And the other thing to note is in order for backend workflows to function, you need to be on a paid plan. So this will not work if you're on a free plan, I'm afraid. So as you can see, I have 4 backend workflows here, or otherwise known as API workflows, but I prefer backend workflows because I think it's less confusing. So I have 4 of them here, and the first one we're going to look at is create course, because that is the one that is triggered from pressing that generate button. So all of these other ones are triggered from this one workflow, so they kind of cascade out. So let's first look at this one. So the first thing it does is it does an OpenAI API call to ask GPT-4 to generate the content of the course. So first I'm going to show you my API connector setup, and then I'll show you the prompts I've got in here. So if I go over to plugins and to the API connector, you can see here I only have one API connected. And if I expand this, you can see I've called it OpenAI. I've selected private key and header. Key name is authorization, and the key value is bearer, followed by a space, followed by my OpenAI API key. And if you're not sure how to do that, watch one of my other tutorials, as I've got quite a few that talk about how to get it. But essentially you just need to go to platform.openai.com. You need to create an account, and then you should be able to create your API keys. You might need to have a paid account in order to do that. So once you've created an API key, you can just paste it here, making sure you have the word bearer and a space there, because that is the formatting that their API requires. And then you can also add in a shared header for all calls, which is key content dash type and the value application slash JSON, and make sure you get all the capitalization exactly as you can see here. Then within this API connection, I have 2 calls. One is chat completion and one is create image, which I'll talk about in a bit. But for now, we are using the chat completion one. And I'm not going to go into full detail about what all of this means. If you've never used the API connector before, definitely check out some of my other tutorials, because I go into a lot more detail about every little part of this. And also I have a course out, in fact, where I teach it right from the ground up. But assuming you have some experience with the API connector, even if you haven't used OpenAI's API, I highly recommend just checking out their API docs, because they are some of the clearest and easiest to use APIs that I've come across. So we've got this first one here, chat completion. I want to use it as an action rather than just data, and the data type is going to be JSON. It's a post request, and this is the endpoint that we're going to be hitting. And then here we have a JSON object, which I mainly copied and pasted from OpenAI. So I'll just show you how to do that. So here we are in the OpenAI API reference docs, and the thing we want here is create chat completion. So here it tells you, it gives you an example request of the information you need to send through to their API to do chat completion. It tells you it's a post request, and this is the endpoint that we have in our API connector, and it also gives you an example of the response that you're going to get at the other end. So what you can do here is, if you go from just after the single kind of apostrophe there with the opening curly brace all the way down to the closing curly brace, ignoring the apostrophe, you can copy that, and then you can go back here and you can paste that in, and you will get almost the same as we have here. So if we look here, you can see they've got model GPT 3.5 Turbo, then they have messages, and they've got this square bracket here and a closing square bracket here. Everything between these 2 square brackets means it's an array, so it can be multiple different objects, all indicated by these curly braces. So you can see here they've got two different messages, one of which has the role of system and the content saying you are a helpful assistant, and then one of which has the role of user and the content saying hello. So if we go back to the API call here, you can see the model here I have changed, so it's not GPT 3.5 Turbo. I have changed it to GPT-4-1106 Preview, which is the new GPT-4-Turbo, which is currently being trialed. And this is one of the models which allows us to specify that we want a response format of type JSON object. So this was a new feature that they announced recently at their dev day, which is quite exciting because essentially it means that you can instruct GPT to return data in a JSON format, and it will do that every time. Now, I have actually been instructing it to return data in a JSON format for ages, and it was working perfectly fine and consistently before, but this just gives a bit of certainty that it's definitely going to return it in that response. So I think for production level apps which are running higher volume and more important API calls than mine were, this is going to be a kind of game changer. But it was working fine for mine as it was anyway. But anyway, take careful note of the syntax here. So response underscore format surrounded by these quote marks, colon, space, curly brace, then type, surrounded by quote marks, colon, JSON underscore object, surrounded by quote marks, and then another curly brace. And then after that, we have the same as we saw in the example. So messages, role, system, content is system prompt, and then role, user, content is user prompt. So these things here, I have replaced where they had said, you are a helpful assistant. I have replaced that with system prompt. So I typed this in myself. And if you surround it with these pointy brackets, then it becomes a variable and it should turn green. And note that I have deleted out the speech marks that were around it, and the same for the user prompt. And that's because we are going to add those in later on. And outside of the square brackets, I've also included temperature, which just gives you some control over the kind of randomness of the response you get back. So this is optional, you don't need to include this, but sometimes I like to tweak that value to see what difference it makes. So once you have your JSON object looking like this, if you put in your pointy brackets correctly, then you should see these three things appear down here: system prompt, user prompt, and temperature, the three variable names that we typed in here. And these boxes will be empty. So in here, you just need to type some test values, which it can use to initialize the call. So initializing the call just means it does a kind of test call to the API in order for Bubble to then get back the response and be able to understand what structure of data it will get back in response. So in this case, for the system prompt, for the test anyway, for the initialization, I just put in you are an assistant, and I surrounded it by speech marks because that is what I was expecting. And then for the user prompt, I also put speech marks, and I put return a list of numbers from 0 to 10 in simple JSON format. Now, it's important that when you are using this response format type JSON object mode, that in your initialization and in all your prompts, you do actually ask it to return JSON, because OpenAI say in their docs that if you don't do that, you might get an error. So even in the initialization, I have asked it to return the numbers 0 to 10 in JSON. And then the temperature value I just gave as 0.8. That's what I normally use. Definitely don't ever use 2, which is the maximum value, because based on my testing, it never actually works. It never responds with anything. So once you've done all that, you can then click initialize call. And you should get back something that looks like this. And this is all the information that OpenAI has sent back. And Bubble is looking at all the different fields, and it's trying to figure out what kind of data it is. So usually you'll need to change the created from a text to a date, or from a number to a date, but everything else is usually fine. And if you click on show raw data here, you can see the actual response that it sent you back. So here we can see the content it sent back was actually numbers, and then it's got an array 1, 2, 3, and so on. So that is a JSON array of the numbers 1 to 10 that it has sent us. Okay, so once we are happy with this, just click save, and now this API call is ready for us to use in the workflows of our app. So if we go back to backend workflows and to this create course workflow, so the first thing we've done is we've run this chat completion API call, which we just set up there, and the system prompt we're sending through here. So I didn't think very hard about these prompts. I just said you're an education specialist. You can put anything you want in here. The important part is that after the arbitrary text, and arbitrary text just means you have basically more space to type in things and put variables in and so on. And then you can just close it and it's all within there. But then after that, I chose formatted as JSON safe. So that means it will wrap the whole lot in speech marks, and it will also get rid of any nasty characters which might confuse the JSON. So if, for example, in your prompt here you had curly braces or commas and stuff, that would confuse the JSON. So formatting as JSON safe will just remove those characters and replace them with versions that JSON will understand and be able to cope with. And then for the user prompt, I've got another arbitrary text here, and I've said, please create a course plan on the following topic. And then I've taken the prompt, which we saved to the course database object, and that was what was typed into the multi-line input. And then I said there should be a maximum of 6 lessons, so obviously you can change that to whatever you want. And then I said, please return the results in JSON according to the following format. And this is the really important bit, because this is where I told it the format that I want the information back in. So let's have a look at this. We've got the opening curly brace, and then we've got course, colon, and then we got another opening curly brace, and we've got title, and then it says title of the course, description, a brief description of what the course is about, image, a prompt for the DALL-E 3 to generate an image relevant to the course, and then I have lessons, and this is an array. We know that because it's got these square brackets here, and then within it it's got like 2 example lessons. So for each lesson, I've said I want a title, a description, and an image, which is going to be a prompt for DALL-E 3 to generate an image relevant to the lesson. And then I've got the same for lesson 2, and then here it's got some commented out lines just saying additional lessons can be added here. You don't need these. To generate this JSON, because I can't write JSON, or I don't want to try writing it from scratch, I use Chat GPT. So let's just have a look at how to do that. So here I am on Chat GPT. So what you can type is, please generate a JSON object for a course with a title, description, and image prompt, and a nested array of lessons, each with a title, description, and image prompt. Okay, so it has created us a JSON object. Previously when I did it, it actually just put example title, example description, but it's actually put in some kind of real information here, which I don't know if that's going to confuse GPT, but let me just try asking it to please Okay, so I've said please replace the example data with descriptions of what the values should contain, and now it's giving me a better example here. So once you've got this, you can just copy the code and then go back here, and then in your user prompt you can just paste the whole lot down here at the bottom. I'm not going to do that because the most important thing is that the keys, so that's the word course, the word title, the word description, the word image, the word lessons, title, description, image, those have to be consistent throughout your app. So you just need to remember what those are and make sure you use them. So as I've already set this all up, I don't want to paste over that in case I've made a typo or Chat GPT made a typo in one of them. But once you've generated your JSON object example, then you can just paste it in here, and then GPT should follow that structure. So the next part of this is probably going to look a bit inefficient and unelegant to many of you. There is a better way of doing this, or there are probably multiple better ways of doing this. There is definitely a better way of doing this where you essentially call your own API and get back all the values neatly parsed and ready to use. But that's a bit more complex to set up. But to be honest, I've used this method in the past a number of times and it works perfectly fine and very reliably for me. So I will do another tutorial about the more complex way of doing this. But for now, I think this is perfectly acceptable way of doing it, and it will make this tutorial a lot shorter as well. So I found a plugin called Read JSON and Get Value by Key, and it is by Hugo. So you can find that in the plugin marketplace. It's free. I tried a lot of the other JSON plugins, and this was the only one I could find that did what I wanted. But I'm sure there are other ones out there, but I couldn't find any. So this is the one I've settled on. So all it does is I drop in an action. So here I got read JSON and get value by key because I've got the plugin. That's one of the available actions I have. So I drop it in as an action here, and then I can use it to extract specific values from the JSON which OpenAI is going to respond with. So for example, in this one, I want to get the course title. So to get that, I'm using this specific notation here. So if we just go back into our prompt. Okay, so you can see course is kind of the top level, the outermost level of this JSON, and then everything within the course is within these curly braces. So that's the next level. So first I have to say, okay, the outermost object is course, and then I put a full stop, and then I tell it which of these things I want to get. So because title is the next level in, if I say course.title, it will return me the title of the course. If I say course.description, it will give me the description. If I want to get something from within the lessons, then I need to say course.lessons, but I also need to tell it which number lesson I want it to pull from, and then I can say .title. So it's a bit like following a breadcrumb trail or giving it a map to the exact information you want. So to get the course title, I'm saying the key name is course.title, and the JSON that it should be looking at to get this is the result of step 1's choices, first items, message content. So if you've used OpenAI's APIs before, you'll know that you always get the choices, first items, message content. The reason for this is that previously OpenAI thought they were going to give multiple choices back and people would be able to choose from them, but at the moment they are not using that functionality. So it's always the choices, first items, message content that you're going for. So if I click on here, you can see the other fields that are available. So it's always choices, then first items, message content. So that will give us the JSON that is being returned by OpenAI. And then we are saying, okay, first we want the course title. Then I've got another almost identical action here, except I'm saying I want the course description. And then I am making changes to the course, and I'm saying the title equals the result of step 2's string. So if you click, so when you select the result of one of these actions, it will give you these different options here. If the data you're expecting is text, then you should always choose string. And if it's a number, then you should always choose number. And I've never had to actually use any of these other ones, but it's usually string or number. So in this case, because it's text, then it's the result of step 2's string. And for the description, it's the result of step 3's string. And I've also saved the raw JSON response from OpenAI into my course object as well, just so I can use it elsewhere. So that is the result of step 1's choices, first items, message content. And then I have another read JSON action, again, referring to step 1's message content. And this time I'm getting course.image, which is going to generate this is the prompt to generate the image that represents the course. And then I have scheduled an API workflow, create image. And the information I'm sending through to this new API workflow or backend workflow is the course, which we got from here, which was sent through from the front end of the site when the user clicked generate, and also the prompt, so the result of step 5, which was the course.image, which is the prompt. So I'm sending that through to this workflow here, and this workflow has the parameters course, which is a course, lesson, which is a lesson, and both of those are optional because I'm using this one workflow to create the images both for the course and for individual lessons. And then I also have the prompt text. So this workflow, the first thing it does is to do another API call. This time it's the create image one. So if we go back to plugins and go to our API connector and scroll down, I've got this second call here, which is create image. And this is also an action. It's a post request, and this is the endpoint that it's going to, /images/generations. And then here I just have a very simple JSON object, which says the model should be DALL-E 3. The prompt I have replaced with pointy brackets and the word prompt. And then the number of images is 1, and the size is this kind of standard size. They only have a few that you're allowed to pick from, so just make sure it's one of the few if you want to change that. And then in order to initialize this, I just typed in, I think it's the same example prompt that they had in their example call, but it's a cute sea otter. And then I just clicked initialize, and this one takes a bit longer because it is creating an image. But the most important thing here is that you can see it returns you a revised prompt and also a URL of the image. Instead of saving that as text, you need to change that to image. And then once you've done that, click save, and I'll show you why in a second. So once you've done that, you are then able to use this API call. So if we go back to our create image workflow here. So here I've got OpenAI create image, and I'm sending through the prompt, which is the prompt that we got from here from our original JSON. And I'm formatting it as JSON safe, just so that it's wrapped in those quote marks and doesn't have any risky characters in it. And then I have two actions here, only one of which will run each time this workflow one. So this one makes changes to the course, and it will save the result of step 1's data's first item's URL saved to S3. So the reason we formatted that URL as an image is so that we can then make use of this bubble action save to S3. Otherwise, we would just be storing that URL as text, and we would not be given this option. And using save to S3 means that instead of just saving this reference URL, which in fact links to one of OpenAI's servers, we're actually going to save that image to our bubble database, which is what we want to do because we don't want to be constantly having to refer to OpenAI servers in case they get rid of the image for some reason. And then I've said only do that when the course is not empty. So the course is this parameter which we're sending through here, but we've said it's optional. So if we send through the course or a course, then it will do this and it will save a new image to the course. But if we send through a lesson, then it will save it to the lesson instead. And so this only runs when the lesson is not empty. So it's just a way of preventing us from needing two different workflows to do this. I've just got one workflow with one API call, and then depending on what information we send through here, it will either save it to the course or it will save it to the lesson. So if we now go back to the create course workflow, which is where we trigger that. So we triggered that API workflow create image. We only sent through the course there. And then lastly, we triggered this workflow create lesson. And I'm going to show you what that does. But the information we're sending through here is firstly the course, the same course which we created before or when the generate button was clicked on the front end of the website and was sent through here. So we're sending through that course, and we're also sending through an index number, which is 0 to start with. So if we go to create lesson here, you can see we've got parameters course and then index, which is a number. So what it's going to do here, firstly, it's going to create a new lesson in the database, and it's going to set the course associated with that lesson to be the course that we've just sent through, the main course we are creating at this moment. Then it's got a load of these read JSON and get value by key actions. So in this case, the JSON it's referring to is courses raw JSON, which is exactly the same JSON value that we received back from this original API call, but instead of getting it here from the message content of step 1, because we can't refer to step 1 of this workflow when we're in a different workflow. That is why we saved the raw JSON onto the course itself. So now when we're in this create lesson workflow, we can now refer to the course's raw JSON, which will be the exact same data that we were referring to earlier. And then we need to get the individual details from the lessons themselves. And so to do that, we have to say course.lessons. So that will take us into the lessons array. And then we need a number which will tell it which item in the array should it be looking at. So that's where the index comes in handy. So we first set the index to be 0, which in a JSON array means the first item in the array. So if you set it as 1, which would normally make sense, you'll find that you're missing the first item in the array. So JSON arrays, the first item is always 0. So we're saying course.lessons.0.title. So we want the title of the first lesson in the array. And then the next one, we want the description of the first lesson in the array. And the next one, we want the content of the first lesson. And then we want the image or the image prompt from the first lesson. And then we do make changes to a lesson, the result of step 1. And the title is the result of step 2. The description is the result of step 3. The order of the lessons, purely because I'm going to use this number to say this is lesson 1, this is lesson 2. And we know the index is 0 to start with, so I don't want to say this is lesson 0 because that wouldn't make much sense to regular people. So I've said order is index plus 1, so in this case it will be 1. Content is the result of step 4, and then the image prompt is the result of step 5. And all of these are the string value from these actions. Then I've scheduled the API workflow create image again, but this time I'm not sending through a course, I am sending through a lesson, which again is the result of step 1. And I'm sending through a prompt, which is the result of step 5 image prompt. I don't actually need to do that, I've just noticed, because I'm sending through the lesson and because we saved the image prompt onto the lesson, I don't actually need to send through this prompt at all, so don't do that. And very importantly, in my case, I have set the schedule date to do this to current date time plus seconds, arbitrary text, which is index times 20, converted to a number. So the reason I've got this is because when I was trying this before, I was finding some images were not getting generated, and I saw an error in my logs which said that I was exceeding the rate limit, which is currently 5 images with DALL-E 3 per minute. So it depends on what level of plan you're on with OpenAI, but that's the restriction I currently have. And I tried doing it with DALL-E 2 and the results were just horrific, so I wanted to use DALL-E 3. So I have put in this number here just to delay how frequently it schedules these workflows. So obviously the first one, this is going to be 0, so it's not going to add any seconds, but the next one it will add 20 seconds, and then it will add 40 seconds, and then 60 seconds, and so on. So there'll be 20 seconds between each image being generated, and hopefully that won't exceed my rate limit. And then step 8, well, maybe I should explain step 9 first. So step 9, I am scheduling the same workflow that we're currently in again. So this is actually a loop, it's going to loop through. So I'm scheduling create lesson again, sending through the same course, but this time it's going to be index plus 1, because then I want it to go through again, the whole thing, create a new lesson, get all of these values, except this time index is going to be 1, and then the next time it will be 2, and so on. So it will gradually work its way through the array of lessons until it gets to the end. So the great thing about this is no matter how many lessons there are created in this JSON object that OpenAI sends back, this will just keep looping through and creating more things in your database until it has got them all. But obviously, and very importantly, you need to tell this workflow when it needs to stop. Okay, so that is why I've got this step 8 here. And what step 8 is doing is it's looking at the raw JSON which we saved on the course, and it's looking at course.lessons, so the lessons array, index plus 1 title. And so I've said only run this workflow again if the result of step 8 is not empty, or the result of step 8's string is not empty. So basically, if it gets here and it looks at the array of lessons and it looks for index plus 1, which in our case we were looking at 0, so that would be 1. So if it looks at the next item in the array and it hasn't got a title, then that means it probably doesn't exist. So it will not run this again. So this is just a way of making it stop at the right moment. I'm sure there is probably a better way of doing this, but this works just fine for me. And then there's just 2 more steps here. Okay, that looks like it's a mistake. I'm not sure why that's there. Just delete that. So then the last workflow I've got in this is to schedule this other one called create lesson content. And actually, I guess some people might find it confusing that I've reset the loop here and then I've got another workflow. So it doesn't actually matter what order you do them in. They'll all get run unless you have something that says like terminate workflow halfway through. But I'll put this here just to make it a bit less confusing. So this one, the reason I've separated out the create lesson content is because originally I was trying to do the whole thing within one API call. So it was creating the course, it was choosing the image prompts, and then it was also creating each lesson's content. But it was timing out because it was just taking too long. So I've separated the actual lesson content into separate API calls. So I've got a workflow here. This just does another chat completion call. Prompt here, education specialist, user prompt. You are creating lesson content for a course titled, and then course's title with the course's description. Create the content for a lesson which has a title, lesson's title. Its description is lesson's description. So this is all stuff which was in the original JSON array. And then I have said to it, use BB code to add structure to your response. For example, a bold heading. Do not use any /n characters for new lines because I found it did that a few times and I didn't want them. Instead, just type a new line. And then I've asked it to give the response in a JSON format purely because I'm using the same JSON mode API call and I couldn't be bothered to make another API call that's not JSON mode. So I've asked it to put it in JSON, but it's very, very simple JSON. It's just content as the key, and then your content goes here as a value. And then another one of these actions, pulling out the key name content to get the value from that. And then I just say make changes to the lesson. The content is the result of step 2's string. So from this looping workflow, both the create image and the create lesson content workflows will be run each time it loops through here. So for each lesson that we're creating in the database, it is going to create an image and it's also going to create the lesson content. And that really is everything you need to know. Everything is done in these 4 workflows. The actual pages here, so the courses page, the course page is just, this is all done with frames, UI kit. So I think it's one of their blog templates. So I hope this tutorial was useful. Apologies if it was slightly rambling, and apologies if I went into too much detail or I went too fast or too slow. This is definitely a technique that you should learn because I have used this exact same technique to make multiple different apps, one of which was a form builder, which you just give it a prompt and then it will generate all the questions for your form with all different types, multiple choice. It will generate all the options for your multiple choice, yes and no and everything like that. And I've also used it to create a website builder where it generated different sections for the website, different images, different icons, different copy, and it all did it using exactly this technique. So I think once you can master this, there's just a ton of different possibilities that opens up for you. So I really hope this was useful. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments or send me a DM, and thanks very much for watching.